everybody, I'm Richard Oldner, and welcome to the channel. As always, before we get going on our discussion about big block forward performance, make sure to like, share, subscribe, ring the bell, do all that stuff so you get notified when I do all this testing. Today in part 1, and yes, that means there's going to be a part 2, but today in part 1, we're going to show you how to make 300, 400, 500, and even 600 horsepower from your 460 Ford. Next, in part 2, we're stepping things all the way up to like 1100 horsepower, but what do you say? Let's jump right in and find out how to make more power from your 460. Okay guys, let's jump right in and take a look at our different variations of a 460 Ford, a big block, and we're going to show you different power levels as I talked about in the introduction. For part 1, we're going to be doing 3, 4, 5, and 600 horsepower combinations. We're going to start off with this one, which is a 300 horsepower combination for a 460. Actually, that's very, very easy. That means just go to the wrecking yard and get a 460 and put it on the dyno the way that we run it. In fact, we just missed making 300 horsepower, although I think that a good version of this motor probably is an honest 300 horsepower motor, at least the way that we run it. Despite the fact that they're rated in the mid 200s, the factory rating from Ford is not the same test method that we use when we run them on the engine dyno. We run them, as I've said many times, in this case we ran it with long tube headers, a zero electric water pump, no accessories, obviously no exhaust, no cats, no mufflers, no anything. We run it colder. We run it with an optimized tune, the right amount of timing and all of that stuff, and we just advance the timing until we get the power, until it stops making power, basically. So we kind of optimize the air fuel with jetting, optimize the timing with the distributor, and then we get the maximum power that otherwise kind of stock combination makes, although this one did have headers. So what I did was went to the wrecking yard, picked up a 460. This was a mid-80s 460, which was pre-fuel injection, so it was still carbureted, but a very, very similar motor. We ran this motor, this was an 85, I believe, 84, 85. We ran it with a stock intake manifold, although the motor did not come with the factory carburetor, so we put a 750 Holley on it. We ran 1 7/8" long tube headers. Otherwise, the motor was just a stock wrecking yard motor. And run in this manner, it got close to making, close to making 300 horsepower, made 297.8, so we'll call that 298 horsepower. Very, very close to 300, 438 foot-pounds. But the way that we made it into a 300 horsepower combination is we did a few quickie modifications, the ones that people would normally do on these things. So we added a very small camshaft. You know, you can call it a torque cam. We also changed the intake manifold. We put a Wyand Stealth intake manifold, and when we did this, because we did this test after doing these upgrades, we changed to the aluminum Wyand Stealth intake manifold. We put a Holley 650 instead of a 750, but at less than 350 horsepower. That's way more than enough carburetor. The camshaft that we put on it was a Comp 256 hydraulic flat tappet cam. We also did a valve spring upgrade. The cam offered a 487-493 lift split, a 212-218 degree duration split, and a 110 degree lobe separation angle. As I said, kind of a truck cam. Otherwise, it was as we ran it before, but equipped with the camshaft and intake manifold upgrade, the peak power jumped up to 340 horsepower. Peak torque was up a little bit to 450 foot-pounds, 449.6 foot-pounds. So now let's take a look and see what we did to make our combination, or put together a combination on a 460 that made 400 horsepower. Okay, now we're going to step up to the 400 horsepower level with a 460 build. This one actually started out a little bit different than the previous one. It started out as a much earlier 460. This one was a 1968, which means it had higher compression. This one, sometime in its life, although we got this from the wrecking yard, it had been rebuilt sometime in its life because it already had a set of 60 over pistons. Now we can go pretty big on the bore on these 460s, which is really, really nice. But otherwise, it had the stock original 68 heads, the intake manifold, stock camshaft, stock rockers. Like the previous one, when we ran this on the engine dyno, we ran it with in this baseline form, we ran it with the stock intake manifold, but a Holley 750 carburetor. We had a set of Hooker 2-inch headers. Again, no mufflers, just the long tube headers, collector extensions, zero electric water pump, no accessories, you know, the way that we normally run it. And run in stock trim, this 68 higher compression 460 produced 349 horsepower. and torque was up pretty good, 492 foot-pounds of torque. And the way that we made it into a 400 horsepower version, obviously, we put some modifications on it. You can see peak power jumped up quite a bit, 436 horsepower. Peak torque was up to 504 foot-pounds. Let's take a look and see our list of modifications here. So we had a set of mildly ported stock heads. We did have a valve spring upgrade because we put a much better camshaft in this thing. Put an Extreme Energy 262 hydraulic flat tappet cam. It was a 515, 520 lift, a 218, 224 degree duration, and 110 degree lobe separation angle. A little bit bigger than the camshaft that we had run on the previous Junkyard motor. We still had our Holley 750 on there. We still had our hooker headers on there, and we did have the Wyand Stealth intake manifold on this as well. In addition to that, we had tried some roller rockers on this thing too. We replaced the factory stamped steel rockers with a set of aluminum roller rockers, and this all worked out pretty well. Once we did this round of modifications, so I went through these actually step by step, and you can see that video is up. So take a look at the 460 video if you want to take a look and see all the step by step power gains on that one. But we jumped up from 349 horsepower to 436 horsepower. So pretty good gains. We did, you'll notice, did lose a little bit of torque down low, down below 3,000 or 3,100 RPM. I don't know why. Maybe the intake manifold, the camshaft shouldn't have lost too much power from the stock one because the 262 cam is still, pretty mild as things go, especially on a 460. So now let's jump up from 400 horsepower to 500 horsepower. Okay, now we're going to jump up to our 500 horsepower level, and this was still a 460. We haven't gotten into the bigger stroker motors yet, which we will in part 2, so make sure to check that out when that comes out. But we have a 460. We did replace some of the rotating assembly. It still had the stock block and stock crank and stock rods, but we had replaced the pistons with a set of Probe forged flat top pistons. The cylinder heads now on this 460 came from the guys at MPG, and MPG heads, and they had a fully ported set of cylinder heads, fully ported set of stock cylinder heads from our 68 original Junkyard motor. We ran a decent sized camshaft in it, not really big. We're going to step up in camshaft when we do our 600 horsepower version, because our 600 horsepower version is just an altered version of this same motor. So I'm going to show you what happened when we made those modifications. But for our 500 horsepower version, we had a Crane hydraulic flat tappet camshaft. It was a 556, 563 lift, 236, 240 degree duration split at 110 degree lobe separation angle. We also had some Crane gold roller rockers on this thing. We had 2-inch long tube headers. And for our induction system, we had a single plane Ford Motorsport intake manifold, which I believe was an Edelbrock Victor Jr. And then we had a Holley 950, back in the day, a 950 HP Holley carburetor. So we had more than enough carburation. But run in this manner with this combination, our 460 easily exceeded 500 horsepower. In fact, it was 573.5 horsepower and 559 foot-pounds of torque. So, good power, certainly possible. And this was just with a ported set of stock heads, which flowed very, very well. So we could make lots of power, and as we'll see, they had the potential to make even more because they flowed pretty well. So this is what happened when we step things up, both in terms of the camshaft and the induction system. So our 600 horsepower combination, you can see our 600 horsepower combination did indeed make over 600 horsepower. It made 609 horsepower peak torque, again, very close to the other 557 foot-pounds, but you can see it did make more power starting at 5,000 RPM. It pulled away from the smaller cam version, but it did lose power down low. We could see it lost as much as 45 foot-pounds of torque down here below 3,500 RPM. So this is very important. If you want a wilder combination, know that there are going to be trade-offs. But speaking of wilder combination, our wilder combination, we take a look at our test description on here. Our 600 horsepower version, we replaced the smaller Crane cam for one dedicated flat tappet cam from the guys at Cam Research. In fact, when I talked to them about this build-up, they said, hey, this is what you're going to need to make 600 horsepower. They sent their ported heads, they sent this camshaft, and they recommended this intake manifold, said this will get you at 600 horsepower. And true to form, they obviously knew what they were talking about. So their cam research solid flat tappet cam was 638 lift, so quite a bit more lift, 264, 268 degree duration split, and 110 degree lobe separation angle. We also had a set of 2 1/8 inch long tube headers, and for the induction system, we changed from the Victor Jr. to a Ford Racing single plane, but designed for the larger 4500 carburetor. So this one might have been like a Super Victor style, but we also use a 1050 Ultra Dominator, so a 4500 series Dominator carburetor. And after making those changes to our 460 combination, again, peak power up at 609 horsepower, 557 foot-pounds of torque. So you can see 600 horsepower, stock camshaft, or not stock camshaft, stock head castings, good sized camshaft, decent compression. The 460s can make a lot of power, but we're going to step things up even further in part 2, so make sure to check that out. I'm Richard Holder. Make sure to like, share, subscribe, ring the bell, do all that stuff. I'll keep testing.